Selwyn Pellett from the Productive Economy Council.
Good morning, welcome to my barbecue. I'm about to fry a few sacred cows. First of all, a bit about my background. I've worked in just about every sector you could work in, from being a state employee, owner-operator, a union worker, corporate manager running a billion-dollar organisation, and a serial entrepreneur. So I don't think you can throw much flack at my background in terms of have I been there, have I done that, I have. We all invest. We invest in our families and our jobs and everything else, but are we investing in our country, our society, and specifically for me, in our exports? We've done the same thing over and over again. How much longer do we want to do it? So the cow's on the spit and we're roasting it. This hasn't delivered the quality of life in recent times that we all desire. So is this the best we can do? And we've been doing it for 100 and something years. Is it the best we can do? We flew in 1903. We had a great entrepreneur and we missed the opportunity to get behind him. I wonder what New Zealand could have been if in 1903 someone had got behind him and said, I'll back you, I'll invest in you. You know, would Boeing be coming out of New Zealand? Who knows? What we do know is that was a missed opportunity. Getting back to sacred cows, BCG says you take the cash flow from a cash cow and you reinvest it. And you put it up into the question marks and hope you grow a few stars. We just keep reinvesting in the sacred cow. We just don't know what to do. We lack vision. We lack courage. So we just keep doing a default strategy. And I call it a default strategy because we don't have a strategy as a country. So we just keep doing what we've always done. This is what I said in 2007, which is basically if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to end up in the cactus, and that's exactly where we've ended up. So, unproductive economy, completely out of balance, and at the time I thought I was quite clever because I wasn't actually looking at the graphs. But when you look at the graphs, it wasn't really that clever. We were almost at the peak. So in 2007, anyone who looked at that graph would have said this is unsustainable. That's housing and farm price increases. The big wiggly one is the farm prices. So does this graph look familiar? Overseas debt going up, private debt, crown debt, the cumulative effect. And it should look the same because essentially all those house prices and farm prices going up, that was all foreign debt. So who cares? What does the foreign debt do? Well, it increases the interest rates for everyone who's trying to do something productive. So we end up with a risk premium on all of our borrowing capacity, and that lifts the exchange rate. So as an exporter, I'm hit twice. One, with a high interest rate. Secondly, with a high exchange rate. My productivity stays exactly the same, but my net output's going up and down according to the exchange rate, being varied by consumption in New Zealand's domestic economy and by people investing in unproductive assets called land and houses. So this is the picture that I want to get across. And by the way, I missed out that point when we were talking about when we had the cow up on the screen. If, and this is an if this country is going to back farming as its only future, if that's what it's going to do, why would you sell the farms? Why would you sell the processing? Why would you sell the distribution rights? And why would you give away the brand? So even if you're going to back farming, we've still got the wrong policies in place. But this is essentially what we're doing. We're just mortgaging our future. And we're losing our economic sovereignty. Note to self, don't use animated slides. Okay, for those who continually say CGT had no, or the lack of CGT had no effect, these house prices are normalised around 1995, and you can see Australia, US and New Zealand, and certainly the lack of CGT has had an effect. And it's had an effect on the tradable economy. We've talked about monetary policy and all its negative effects. We could talk for several hours on the effect that that has. But essentially, this is the output. This is what we want: a balanced economy, a balanced exchange rate, and surplus and deficit are somehow in balance. This is what happens when you have a low exchange rate. You know, I do well. You pay more at the pump. You pay more for an overseas holiday. The problem is I'm probably 15% of the population. People like me. You're 85. So the 85 wins at the polls. So we end up with a lot of people biased towards a high exchange rate. The only problem with that is it's unsustainable because we put the country into deficit, because we keep borrowing. And we keep mortgaging our land, buildings and our future tax revenue. It's just unsustainable, so eventually you have to pay the price. Overseas debt, Crown overseas debt. And this is the picture I want you to remember, because we take our best and brightest, we invest in them, they go out, they start a business, and they just get it going, and they're just exporting, so all the good things that you want, and then out comes a high exchange rate, and we burn them off. We just pull it out, light it up, and they're gone, never to return. That's the effect of a high exchange rate on our non-primary exports. Every time it goes up, they die. And I'm personally getting hit right now to the tune of hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars with the high exchange rate. And it's just money from my perspective. It's just evaporating out of my hands. It was there yesterday, it's gone tomorrow. And I've done nothing. My behaviour hasn't changed, the price in the end market hasn't changed, and it's money that's not arriving in New Zealand. So maybe Phil had a point. You know, the people who think they're doing great by New Zealand and participating in the speculative economy, they do need to be cut down. And we do need to allow the productive economy to grow. So my grandchildren want a different future. And it'd be really nice if we could start with a vision, and really that's my vision for the future. It's about growing a very different economy and leaving our children and our grandchildren with some options, some strategic options, which means we're not pushing debt into the future and stripping revenue-generating assets out for them and spending it today. We're actually creating real wealth. Interesting slide. You might have seen it before. The difference is I'm proposing to fill it with entrepreneurial exports. Just need to shift this a bit. It's interesting because you see Denmark there in New Zealand. Now what I've done with this graph, I've taken all the hours that are worked according to the OECD, on average. I've normalised it around Australia, so I've subtracted Australia's hours of work, and then I've divided by 40 to give you the number of weeks a year that we're working less or more than Australia. And we work more than average. So the number of hours we work, but have a look at Korea, and the real shocker for me on that graph was Greece. So here's Greece in real trouble, and look at the number of hours they work. And then look at Denmark, working considerably less than we do. And by the way, now have a look at Greece on this graph, earning roughly the same as we do, per hour. And have a look at Denmark. So certainly, if we keep doing what we've been doing, we're going to end up poor. This is from my own data. This is the New Zealand income per sector, and at the end I've put my two companies. So I export high tech. The average income is $106,000 a year. That's the average income for every employee who works in the businesses I created. And that gap is the very gap that we need to fill. So what difference would it make? Talking about small ideas, this is actually relatively easy to do. It's relatively easy. If you could repeat what I did 10 times and then 100 times, you're adding $7 billion worth of exports a year. It's not to have 100 such success stories is not that great. 18,000 jobs. Half $500 million to $1 billion in incremental tax revenue. Now, if you took the number down to 5 years instead of 10, it would still be more than 50%, because the growth rolls off as you get bigger. So in 5 years, it would have been more than half of that number. There's a few things you need to do first, and just about every point on there has already been covered. But the prevailing wisdom is you cannot control the exchange rate. And there's a lot of reasons why you can't, but all the points underneath help you to control the exchange rate. And someone asked the question this morning about Singapore. Singapore controlled capital flows when it considered itself to be a developing nation. It's eased up on capital flows, and largely all of its policies are designed to control the exchange rate. And if we considered ourselves to be a developing nation and adopted some of the same policies, we'd be better off in the future than we are today. So what do we need? We need some entrepreneurs, and being a history buff, I think about the Battle of Britain and how they won it, and it was a lot of pilots. And the interesting thing that they did is they screened for pilot behaviour, for fighter behaviour. One of my personal beliefs is entrepreneurs are born, they're not trained. You can't go to university in isolation and learn to be an entrepreneur because you don't have the risk profile. And without that risk profile and a mixture of analytical and creative skills, you're unlikely to be successful. So why don't we screen for it the same as they did for fighter pilots? Why don't we identify kids at school and say, you know what, based on your profile, you're actually capable of being an entrepreneur. Would you be interested in doing this class? And we start creating an entrepreneurial society where, just like those fighter pilots, they were heroes. And that's what we need. First of all 100, then 1,000 of them. So there's a few things there about what you would do, but after you've screened for them, after they've gone through the various courses, they'd then be married up with senior entrepreneurs, and they would be guided for a few years, mentored, apprentice entrepreneurs who would learn some of the skills, who would travel the world with, I call them bag carriers. I've got 2, I'm looking for a 3rd, who follow me around to learn what I do, to start a program which I hope I'll personally be investing in these candidates. So that's my small idea with a great big outcome. But remember, there's a shit pile to do already. You now have that buried into the policy of various political parties, but they all need to be dealt to. And you can vote for those. You need to, post an election, you need to do something about the entrepreneurial training. Thank you very much.